guys, and happy April. So this video is going to be the March recap, everything that I read in the month of March. And this month I actually did a little bit of a different format. So instead of me sitting here the whole time and talking about the books that I read last month, I actually videoed throughout the month and did small little snippets every time that I finished a book. So you get more of my immediate reactions to the books and different settings that I was in throughout the month. So you get lots of different scenes. So I thought that would be more fun to do. Just an overview of the books that I read. I did read 7 books last month and 2,014 pages. It wasn't as good of a month, but I think I enjoyed it more, just being able to read 4 different actually print books and then listening to 3 books. And I enjoyed a lot of these. There was a couple, like a 2-star and a 1-star, but then a couple of 4 stars. So I think overall it was a better month than most because I read some things that I actually did enjoy. So if you go through this video, there's going to be a review of Lies Young Women Believe, Caesar in the Church by Anthony Forsyth, The Nature of Small Birds by Susan Finkbeiner, Dorothy Sayers' Strong Poison, and then The Second Mrs Esther, and 1776, and there's one more. I can't remember. Let me find it. Oh, and Fable, which is the 1-star read of the month. So I hope you guys enjoy this video and maybe find some good book recommendations. Let me know what your favorite book was from the month and down in the comments, and maybe someone will be able to add that to their list of books to read based off of your good review. So I will see you guys in another video. Bye. I finished my first book of March on March 9th. Last night I finished this book, Strong Poison by Dorothy Sayers, and this change of scenery is brought to you by Beck Film Productions being out of town and me stealing his entire setup. But I wanted to talk about this first book that I read. So I haven't rated this yet, but I'm probably going to give it 4, maybe 5 stars. I really enjoyed the humor in it, and as you can see, this is the first book that I've ever tabbed and highlighted, and that was really fun to be looking for funny little moments to highlight and all the different things in here. And it was interesting because I heard that seeing Harriet Vane and Lord Peter Wimsey together was really just interesting and better than him by himself, but there wasn't much of their interaction in here. There was a little bit, but the only other book that I've read by Dorothy Sayers is The 9 Tailors, and that was really boring. Like, I enjoyed it, but there was just so much about the bells and everything, so I expected this to be a little bit boring, but it honestly was really good. I just noticed this picture on the front. If you read it, you know. But I thought it was really well done, and you kind of suspect who is the murderer about halfway through the book, but you have no idea why he did it or how he did it. And so it was just really genius the way that Lord Peter figured out all of the little clues and why he did it and how he did it. I really enjoyed seeing Lord Peter's relationship with his family, especially his sister. It was really fun. So if you don't know, the plot of this book is basically Lord Peter Wimsey. He's I think he's a detective, but it's not Hercule Poirot, that kind of detective, but he just is really good at figuring things out. So I don't think he was ever hired by anyone, not in this book, but he just figures these things out. He works with the police, kind of like Sherlock Holmes. It felt more like Sherlock Holmes than Poirot. But he is at the trial of this lady who all the evidence points to her having killed her lover. And he looks at her and says, nope, she's innocent. And then the jury, there's one person in the jury who won't agree that she's guilty. So then it has to go back through the courts and everything. So he uses that month that he has to accumulate as much evidence as he can to figure out who it is, because he just knows that it's not her. And he basically walks in the room and he says, I'm going to prove that you're innocent and I'm going to marry you. And she says, that's ridiculous, but go ahead and try. And it was really cool. I really liked his cattery, where he has all these women for a hiring agency, And so people would come in and say, I need a secretary or whatever, and he would be able to supply that from this recruiting agency. So it seems like just a regular old recruiting office, basically. But he uses them as spies. So he will be able to hire out these secretaries or whatever is needed to be able to spy on whoever is suspected. And the fun part was whenever he sent the lady who kind of runs the whole thing, she gets to go to the country, and he basically says, this lady's dying, I need you to find her will and basically steal it. I have no idea how you're going to do it. It's probably going to be illegal, but I just need you to figure out how. And so she goes and figures it out, and it's just really fun. So there's a lot of comical things in here. I think that's why I really liked it, and it came together really well, and there definitely was nothing gruesome about it. He is poisoned by arsenic, and so there's no blood or anything like that, but it just didn't feel like it focused on the crime. It focused more on figuring out who did it. So if you're looking for a good, like, clean mystery, I would recommend this one. I recently finished this book, Lies Young Women Believe by Nancy DeMoss Wolgemuth and Dana Gresh. I've been reading this for a long time through a counseling case that I was doing and using this in our counseling sessions, but I just finished it this month and I did not leave a very pleasant review for it. I gave it 2 stars. Now, is this book useful? Yes. Did it bring up some great conversations? Yes, it did. I think there is a setting where this could be really useful if you are in a youth group where the majority of the kids are from public school, and they really need this biblical foundation that is more relatable to someone who's coming from a worldly background. I think this can be really useful to bring up those conversations as maybe a small group leader. However, I would not feel comfortable using this in a counseling relationship. Again, I think there are so many other books on this topic on just growing to know God better and to get rid of these lies that you believed about him and about your life. My biggest issues with this book is that it is really light on the theology. There wasn't necessarily any wrong theology in there, but it was very light, and I would like something a little bit deeper and a little bit more focused on the Bible and less examples, less advice, but more let's dig deep into the Bible and see what it really has to say about the issues. Although there is a lot of scripture in here, I think it just could have been more, okay, here's the problem, now let's deep dive in this chapter on specifically what the Bible says about it, and less talking about the problem, if that makes sense. But my biggest issue in this was there is a chapter in here on relationships, and I feel like it goes into too much detail and brings up too many topics surrounding sex that a young woman should not be exposed to while reading a book like this. I did not feel comfortable talking about that chapter in the counseling room, so we skipped over that one. But throughout the book, it brings up that situation as an example for many of the different lies in here. And just the example of sin throughout the book is pretty much always something connected to sex, and I feel like that was not the way that you should write a book to young women, bringing up those sins so much. The focus should be more on the truth. Yes, we should talk about purity and warn these young women away from sexual sins, but I think it could have been talked about more delicately and put the focus more on the positive of purity and not bring up so many topics that I think a young woman should not be exposed to while reading a book, but should rather talk to her parents about and be warned away from that. So that's why I only gave it 2 stars, and I think there's a lot of other books that you can read, like Damsels in Distress by Martha Peace is a really good one, Biblical Solutions for Problems That Women Face. This has a wide range of topics, and it was really enjoyable to go through as a small group book study. Another one is Disciplines of a Godly Woman by Barbara Hughes. This is a good, just basic one going through all the different disciplines that a woman should have, and I think this is good and useful for any age woman. I really enjoyed going through it. And then one that I have not read yet, but I've heard great things about, is Let the Women Be Women by Chris Mueller. This is about God's design for womanhood and marriage. So if you're looking for books to go through with young women in a book study, I think those would be much more useful to you and by much more solid authors than the Lies Young Women Believe. So I just finished a book called Fable by Adrienne something. I'll put the the picture here on the screen, but I listened to it on audiobook, and it was a pretty short book. I'm going to end up probably giving it 1 star. I actually listened to it because of a book club that I was part of, that we picked the book out, and really the reviews on the book would not have warned you at all what the content of the book would be and if there was going to be anything questionable on there. So if you go back and look at the video I did on how to find content reviews on books that you're looking at, the reason why I did that video was because of this book that I read. So basically Fable is about, it's kind of like a pirate-ish story, but it's weird to even try to figure out what it is. She's like a diver who goes down and gets like gems and precious things out of the ocean, and then she goes and sells them. And her father is one of these big trader ship masters, whatever. And he's abandoned her, and so she grows up and she tries to go find him. She gets on the ship where she really likes the crew, and like forms like a family bond in the crew. So parts of the story could have been really good. I think it could have had potential, and I did like some of the characters. However, some of them, which totally should have been brothers, the author made it into like a LGBT couple. And then there is like the captain and Fable, they end up falling in love, and there is a kiss and then like a fade to black scene, and then there is a couple of like light language in there. So really, this is the kind of book that is written in, I think it was written like 2020, 2021 maybe, and you just get a lot of content like that. So overall, like, it wasn't terrible and like explicit things in there, so I'm not like extremely mad that I finished it, because I am grateful that now I can go write a bad review on it and other people can be warned, because it's not a book that has really any bad reviews on it. So I am glad that I can write that, and that families who are worried about that kind of stuff, since it is marketed as a YA book, even though it's not a YA book at all, that you can be warned of that. So that was my 1 star read of the month. Hi guys, I got a special guest here today. So today I need to talk about 2 books that I just finished. Well, one I kind of finished a while ago. I just haven't talked about it yet, and that is Caesar and the Church by Anthony Forsyth. So this book is about how the church can interact with the government, and what is the government's authority over the church, when should we obey it, when should we resist it. And I thought this was a really short book, and he did a really good job of laying out the biblical principles when it comes to authority in general. I learned a lot from this book, just about how authority has its own realm, and they have the limits of their authority. A parent only has authority over their family and their children, and a church elder only has authority over his church, and he doesn't have absolute authority. He can't tell you to do something outside of his spiritual realm. So that was really informative to read about that, and to learn, okay, so the president only has authority in the civil realm over his own country, so he can't tell you to do something outside of that civil realm. He can't come into religion or health, or this is only about civil. And then he talks about how the reason why God set up rulers over us to reward good and to punish evil. I tabbed this book up and highlighted it because there are some really good quotes in here and really good principles. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and the only reason why I knocked off a star was just because the beginning was pretty basic and foundational, which is important, but I felt like he felt like it was basic, and so he wrote in a way that wasn't as good as the rest of the book. As he gets into the book, his writing gets a lot better, and in the beginning it was a little bit boring. But overall, it was a good book, and I would definitely recommend it, that all believers read, especially in the day and age where government really is trying to overstep its bounds. He also addresses the fact that we have accepted the government as God in our modern American culture, so I really like this one. And then the next book that I finished was 1776 by David McCullough. I listened to this one. I gave it 4 stars, even though I didn't exceptionally enjoy it. So it's a nonfiction book about the American Revolution. And I did enjoy learning about the American Revolution, learning about George Washington and how great of a leader he was. It did focus a lot on that. And he even does say at the end of the book that it is amazing that the Americans even won the war. And I'd say that was my biggest takeaway from it, was that it was really impossible for them to win, that they were so outnumbered, they lost so many battles, and yet somehow we still did win the Revolutionary War. So I thought that was really just fascinating to learn about. Even though the book wasn't that interesting, I felt like it was more on the boring side, but also that could have just been the narrator. It's really hard to listen to nonfiction audiobooks because often the narrator is really boring. So there's the 2 books that I finished recently. Alright, I just finished another book last night, The Nature of Small Birds by Susan Finkbeiner. So Chantel Reads All Day recommended this one, and I decided to pick it up when I found it on the book outlet. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. So I did enjoy it, even though at the beginning it was really hard to follow because there's 3 different viewpoints, 3 different time periods, and it's all following the same family. So that was really hard and really confusing to follow. But whenever I got into it, I actually kind of liked it. However, I did not end up liking it at the end because it just ends so abruptly. There's not really a strong conclusion. It's definitely more of a character-driven book versus a plot-driven, which I prefer more of a plot-driven book. So basically the storyline is of a family where they adopted a girl from Vietnam and during the baby lift in the 60s, and in 2013 I think she decides to try to find her mother and reconnect with her. And so it's, I guess, based on the back of the book, the different timelines are supposed to be each member of the family remembering what it was like as they acclimated to being this family. But the ending was just very anticlimactic and not a lot happened. The writing was pretty good, and I thought she did well in writing in the 3 different styles of the different people, which was cool, but only 3 stars for me. So I just finished the Second Mrs Esther, and I gave that 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's the story of this young woman who is 17, and she meets this guy who is much older than her, John Jacob Astor, and he's very rich, and basically everyone around them tells them that they should not get married because she's much younger, she's much poorer. And so really the story of the book is her learning to fight against like the public eye and the public opinion, and the press is really interested in her and always following her around. She kind of has to learn how just loving her husband is more important than what everyone else around her thinks, and just kind of like be content in the marriage even though she feels lonely with all the rest of the world not really liking her. So from the beginning of the book, you know that they're going to get on the Titanic and that she's going to survive, but he's not. So there is definitely that foreshadowing throughout the book, which is sad, and you just feel really emotional in a lot of parts where you know that this happiness is not going to last. I would say that it was an overall clean book. Definitely it felt very sentimental and almost romantic in parts, but I think that was really just because of the narrator, because I listened to it, and she did a really good job of being very emotional and very soft-spoken, and so some of the parts I think came off as more emotional and like romantic than they were. And there was only, I think, one part where she was, after they were married, she was kind of just looking at him and thinking about how he looked. That was really the only part, I think, where there was anything not clean in there. So yeah, it was an overall enjoyable book, and I really liked the historicalness of it.